This is a Sunshine Shoulders production. Unspoken Agreement. Stories of Love and Betrayal in the Philippines. The Setup. Part 1. Panic started to set in as the taxi raced toward Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila. John kept glancing out of the back window. Were they following him? Did they see which taxi he had gotten into? John went through the last 4 months over and over in his mind, trying to find out what went wrong. Were there red flags that he missed? How could he have been so blind? Everyone had warned him about his plans to move 8,000 miles to the Philippines and start his retirement with a much younger woman that he had met online. He never expected anyone to understand. No one knew of the loneliness and despair that he felt. He wanted to be wanted again, to be depended on. Maria had come into his life as if by divine intervention. She was the answer to his prayers. She listened to his problems, and there were many, and never criticized him. He thought that she was different from the scammers that prey on lonely men in the West. Above all things, she was beautiful and innocent. He was so sure about her intentions that he started sending money over for their new life together shortly after meeting her. The plan was simple. He would move to Dumaguete, a small seaside city in the middle of the country, and take advantage of the low cost of living and tropical weather. With his 401k savings and his retirement pension, it would be enough for them to live comfortably. No one told him that the best laid plans go astray. As the taxi came to a stop in front of Terminal 3, he handed the driver the fare and hurried inside to catch his flight. It was then that it dawned upon him that it was all a setup. Maria was riding high. Business was booming, and there seemed to be no end in sight of desperate old men eager to send money to rescue poor Filipino women. Sometimes she felt guilty, if only for a short while, till she thought about the alternative. Hand-washing piles of dirty clothes all day long down by the river for 200 pesos per day. It was back-breaking work with very little pay. She used to wear long-sleeve blouses and shirts to protect her skin from the hideous rashes caused by the toxic chemicals in the cheap detergent and bleach. And her back hurt sitting for hours on that 6-inch plastic stool. Life was tough in Cebu land, a mountain province high above Dumaguete. She had dreams of marrying a foreigner and being whisked away to a new life in a new land. Her dream was not unlike the millions of other Filipino women who found themselves stuck in abject poverty with very little hope of ever escaping. That would all soon change. A classmate had told her about a scheme to earn money. Sign up on several of the dating sites and pander to the lower instincts of lonely old men looking for love. They would send her money in exchange for a little conversation and maybe the hope of securing her company for their trip to the Philippines soon. Sometimes the men would ask for nude photos or a quick flash. Money was always the goal and never love. Acquiring true feelings for the men only got in the way of the ruthlessness needed to succeed in the scam. Things started out slowly, and she began to question her decision. She seemed to be spending all her time online fishing for men with very little results. Her English wasn't great, and sometimes she was embarrassed by her inability to understand what the men were saying. And other times she was inadvertently speaking her native Bisaya language, further complicating things. But her pleasant looks and full-tooth smile more than made up for it. And when she received her first remittance from overseas for 2,500 pesos, more than she earned in the entire month, Maria was tempted to stop there, content with striking it rich. But a friend told her that some months she earned upwards of 100,000 pesos. In the beginning, she kept her secret from her family. She had no idea what her father would think of her new business. Being from a proud Filipino family and raised Roman Catholic, she feared they wouldn't understand. Soon there was no hiding. She had to explain where all the money was coming from. Remittances became more frequent, and Maria was able to move out of the province and get a small room in a boarding house with a fan and television. And although the tin roof sometimes leaked during heavy rain, it was much better than the ramshackle plywood with no running water or electricity that she had known since a child. Hers was a humble beginning. She was able to buy a used motorbike too, something she only dreamed of before. Ray, the father of her baby, had become aware of her good fortune and started coming around more. She lost her virginity to him and at age 26 gave birth to Brianna, who was Ray's third child by 3 different women. He was a chick's boy with no money and plenty of bad habits. Ray encouraged her to continue in her business. He would later come up with a scam that would cost a hard-working man from Jeffersontown, Kentucky, his entire savings. The retirement party had been a success. 40 years at the factory suddenly didn't seem like a waste of time. A few weeks ago, John had no clue what he would do in retirement and even contemplated changing his mind and working for a few more years. His boss had left the offer to return on the table, and now everything was falling into place. In a little over a week, he would be retired and on his way to the Philippines to start a new chapter in his life. He had never heard of the Philippines, except for a famous boxer who hailed from there. He went to bed with the image of Maria burning in his subconscious. It would be a good night's sleep, he thought, as he drifted off. Maria had developed a routine. Upon awakening, the first thing she would do was check her messages in Filipino Love, the dating site that was responsible for her new fortunes. As she skimmed through her messages, she would always look for someone who she thought would be sympathetic to one of her sob stories. She had gotten good at inventing the stories. Oftentimes, she would say that her baby was sick or needed milk and diapers. It worked every time. She had a few regulars, and a couple of them had even talked about coming over to the Philippines for a visit. This made her nervous. She always remembered rule number 1. Money was the goal and not love. The thought of being with one of those old men made her stomach turn. Besides, Ray was the only man she loved. This morning, one profile caught her attention. His name was John. Very seldom would the men give their full names, but there it was, as clear as day. John Masterson. There was something about his eyes that drew Maria to him. He looked sincere. His profile said that he was 63 and nearing retirement. He was divorced with 2 grown children and was searching for a loyal and committed woman. They all say that, she thought as she chuckled to herself. The message began. Hello, I'm John and I'm interested in meeting you. He lived in Kentucky and she was not familiar with that place. Google said he was 12 hours behind, so she sent her same plain response. Hello, I'm Maria, nice to meet you. She closed the app and went into town. When she returned to check for John's reply, she was shocked. He had written several paragraphs. He asked for more pictures, which she hurriedly sent. She had been doing this long enough to know that this guy could potentially be a catch. They exchanged messages for a few days, and then he asked if she was available to video chat. Maria sent John her profile on WhatsApp and waited anxiously for him to call. When the camera opened, Maria was surprised at who she saw staring at her on the screen. He looked better than his profile and was guapo, or handsome. As soon as John saw Maria on screen, he knew immediately that she was the one. He couldn't believe that a pretty 28-year-old woman with the rest of her life ahead of her would find anything interesting about him. He was smitten from the start. He silently thanked Tommy, his friend from work, who had suggested the Filipino love dating site to him. Tommy had met his beautiful young wife on the app, and they seemed to be happy too. Besides, he had nothing to lose. $29.99 for a monthly subscription was not going to bankrupt him. The back and forth went on for a week, and Maria thought she had read John well enough to ask for a few pesos to help with milk and diapers for her daughter. John quickly obliged. She was stunned when he sent a remittance for 10,000 pesos. It was the most money she had held in her hand at one time in her entire life. It was the beginning of a whirlwind relationship that would change both of their lives forever. Ray couldn't believe his dumb luck. Just yesterday, he was begging pesos in front of the 7-Eleven to buy cigarettes, and today he's walking around with a big wad of bills, thanks to Maria. He was determined to stick close to her and squeeze every peso out of her that he possibly could. He knew that Maria was madly in love with him and would do whatever he asked, despite the warnings of her parents. They despised him. Ray already had 2 other children from 2 previous relationships and hadn't held a job in years. They saw no real future for her with him and told her to stay clear of him. Love is blind, and Maria was as blind as it gets when it came to Ray. He was starting to put more pressure on her to bring in more money, although she was up to 40,000 pesos per month, and the majority of that was coming from John. As his good fortunes grew, so did his drug habit. Shabu was consuming half of the money that Maria was bringing in. Ray had a plan, but it centered on Maria convincing the foreigner to come to the Philippines to live with her. He knew he had to act fast because he thought he had sensed true feelings for the old man coming from Maria. He would ask her to have the foreigner send money over to buy a house and lot. He would pose as the uncle who is selling the property, and the old foreigner wouldn't be any wiser. The house would be a rental, and he would have his sister, who worked in City Hall, type up some phony documents. The more he thought about it, the harder he laughed. In his twisted mind, he thought the plan was genius. And if the old man became suspicious, he would just go back to his old squatter's compound and hire 2 of his friends to take care of his problem. John fell for Maria fast, and he felt that he loved her. Every day he would hurry home from work to check his messages in Filipino love or his WhatsApp for any response from her. This time, the message in Filipino love took on a strange tone. There was a sense of urgency to it. Maria asked John what his plans were for their future. Were they going to move forward and become a real couple or remain internet lovers? John couldn't believe what he was reading. This was what he had been praying for. He wanted to marry Maria and take care of her, but was afraid he was moving too fast. He had been out of the dating game for years, and this was the first time he had ever dated someone so much younger than him. And if that wasn't enough, she lived 8,000 miles away in another country with a culture he knew nothing about. When they next chatted, John excitedly informed Maria of his plans to retire and move to the Philippines to spend the rest of his life with her. Maria smiled nervously as Ray was giving instructions to her out of the view of the camera. My uncle has a house and lot that he's willing to sell to us, and he will give me a discount, Maria said. John replied, how much is he asking for the property? 2 million pesos, Maria blurted out, surprised at how calm the amount rolled off her lips. 2 million pesos is a fortune for the masses of Filipinos in her country, and many would consider it as lifetime money. She was sure he would not agree, but John said yes, almost before she could finish her sentence. Ray couldn't believe his ears. Was it this easy? Maybe he should have asked for more money. What should have been the happiest day of her life instead made Maria shudder with fear. Over the 3 months that she and John had communicated, she felt herself developing feelings for him, even love. And she knew that once Ray got his hands on that money, he would not be satisfied until he had it all. Looking into his red eyes made her regret the day she had met him. John proudly filed his retirement papers with Human Resources the next day. After a little small talk, John's boss arranged to sponsor a retirement party for John, celebrating his 40 years with the company. John said he would be more comfortable with an intimate gathering of close friends and co-workers in his home. His boss agreed. As the date of his retirement drew near, John started to get questions from his co-workers that are normal when someone retires. What will you do with your time? Are you sure you're going to go through with it? Why now? John held the answers close to the vest and had decided to reveal his plans at the party. The party was great. Everyone that he invited showed up to give him a big send-off. After dinner, John stood and told everybody to have a seat. He had an announcement to make. As the room started to quiet down, John gently tapped his fork against his glass. I want to thank everyone for braving the cold and coming out to my retirement party. These last 40 years went by so fast. It was an honor and a privilege to work side by side with many of you in this room. I'm going to miss you. I've decided to sell everything and move to the Philippines to live with my girlfriend Maria, who I met online 3 months ago. She's heaven sent and the answer to my prayers. I'm in love with her and there's no turning back. I've bought my tickets and I leave in a week. Thanks again for sharing this moment with me. Many in the crowd were stunned at what they heard. It came from out of left field. John had not given any clues that he had met anyone online or that he was now selling everything to move 8,000 miles away to begin anew. The reactions were varied. Some wished John the best, but most questioned his sanity and even told him of their thoughts. Haven't you heard of the reputation of Filipino women? Said one. She only wants you for your money, John, said another. John knew that they were well-meaning, and he also knew that they would never understand. That's why he decided to play it close to the vest. As the night came to an end, John was more convinced than ever that he had made the right decision. Ray and Maria sat anxiously by the phone awaiting the text from Western Union. It would be the first of a series of remittances until the full 2 million pesos payment was made. Ding! The sound of the notification made Maria jump. She quickly wrote down the information and convinced Ray to stay in the room and let her go pick up the money alone. Ray hesitantly agreed. Maria was nervous as she rode in the trike to the local Western Union office. The thought of carrying 200,000 pesos in her purse caused tiny beads of perspiration to gather on her forehead. She looked down at her hands and noticed that they were trembling. A wave of emotion swept over her, a mix of excitement and concern. Will the transaction go through, she thought? And although John had sent money through the office many times and the clerks were familiar with her, she stepped out of the trike in fear and trepidation. Maria filled out the forms and slid them towards the clerk and took a seat on the bench. Maria, can you sign right here? Said the clerk, and Maria scribbled her name and gave the form back. The clerk pushed the stack of bills toward Maria. As she placed the money in her purse, she started to have second thoughts. I shouldn't go through with this. John is such a good man, and he doesn't deserve to be treated like this. He would do anything for me and my child. I feel ashamed of what I'm doing. I can stop this scam right now and give the money back to John once he arrives. She got up to leave and was startled by the reflection in the mirror of the bloodshot eyes staring back at her through the glass door. It was Ray. I asked you to stay in the room, she said. Ray replied, I changed my mind. Give me the money. Maria knew immediately that when she put the crisp packs of 1,000 peso bills in his hand, that there was no turning back. She was now all in on the scam. John eventually sent the rest of the money. It was like winning the lottery. Everything that they only used to dream of buying was now in their possession. Hot showers became a daily routine. They had a toilet that flushed. A real queen-size mattress with a box spring replaced the battered old foam that served as their bed before. Taxis now carried them to and from the big fancy malls, the trunk full of new clothes and the latest gadgets. No more shopping at the okai shops for something to wear. A smart television now stood in the place of the old one with the fuzzy picture. Maria even purchased an automatic washing machine. Their old existence was slowly disappearing in the rearview mirror. There was binge drinking with a slew of new friends nightly. Drugs flowed in and out of the new house that they were now renting as part of the scheme. There seemed to be no end to the good times. Ray's attitude changed and he became more abusive. They fought almost daily. He wanted more and more control of the money. He made a few bad investments like someone who is new to money usually makes. Maria found out that he was having an affair with one of her friends, but by this time there was no reaching Ray. The shabu had turned him into a monster. In a few short weeks, half the money was gone. Maria was the one responsible because John knew nothing of Ray. Guilt wrecked her mind. She thought she would have a nervous breakdown. John would be here in a week. What was she going to do if he found out she had scammed him? Through it all, she never gave her parents 1 peso of the money. Flight crew, prepare for landing. The sound coming from the speakers woke John from his sleep. The plane was now on its descent. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now approaching the city of Manila, and the local time is 10:30 p.m., and the temperature is 32 degrees Celsius. Please ensure all electronic devices are turned off. Return your seats to the upright position with your seatbelt securely fastened until the airplane comes to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign is turned off. Welcome to Manila. John couldn't hold in his excitement. His first international trip wasn't so bad. He knew nothing of the jet lag that awaited him. There's a 12-hour time difference between Jeffersontown, Kentucky and Manila. And when you add to that the 20 hours spent cooped up in that aluminum can of an airplane, jet lag can be brutal. It's not a matter of if it will hit you, but when. He raised the window shade and looked down on the millions of lights illuminating Manila. In a few minutes, he would be on the ground. It was no longer a fantasy. It was now reality. Maria paced up and down the floor of Terminal 3 inside of the Ninoy Aquino International Airport. John's plane would be landing soon. She was filled with fear and anticipation. It would be the very first time she had ever met a foreigner before. She had made plans to spend a few days with John in the hotel to give the cleaners time to tidy up the house. All the partying over the last week had caused a mess. Ray gave her instructions on how to handle John. Do everything he asks you to do and don't hesitate. The words echoed in her head. She knew exactly what he was talking about. Sex. Ray was the only man who she had ever given herself to. She had heard rumors about the size of the foreign penis and was hoping she could handle John's advances. Maria kept glancing at the flight boards to see if John's plane had landed. Scanning the board, she saw that Eva Airways Flight 55 had landed. She hurried to gate 13A and waited. After what seemed like an hour, She could see John getting closer and closer. Her heart started beating triple time. She had to calm down, or maybe he would suspect something. She became paranoid. But all of that went away when John pulled her to him in a warm embrace, and she saw the look of wonder in his eyes. This was going to be easier than she thought. At this very moment, she knew she could do no wrong as far as he was concerned. They hailed a taxi and were soon on their way to Mabisa Hotel and Restaurant in nearby Pasai City. They checked into room 113B, and Maria was caught off guard by John's quick actions. He kissed her hungrily, and it was clear that he hadn't had any female intimacy in a while. "Slow down, honey," Maria told him. "We have all night for this. Let's take a shower first," she reminded John. John hurriedly removed his clothing and turned on the shower in the bathroom. It took about 4 minutes for the water to warm up. The water pressure felt good on his neck after that long flight. It was relaxing. He was coming to his senses now. Here he was, 8,000 miles away from home, in a hotel room with a woman he barely knew, and yet he felt as if it were destiny. He started to lather up, and in walked Maria. She removed her towel, and John couldn't believe what he was seeing. She was perfect in every way. Her long flowing hair and smooth skin held him captive. Her breasts were firm and perky like the women he saw in the magazines. She was neatly shaved below with only a buzz covering her womanhood. John could no longer restrain himself. He pulled her close and thrust his tongue inside her mouth. He wanted to make love to her right then and there, but decided to wait until they were in the bed. The next hour was like a dream. It was everything that John imagined it to be. Maria climaxed 2 times and satisfied all of John's fantasies. She did exactly what Ray had instructed her to do. Whatever John wanted, she was willing to try, even if it hurt. Afterwards, he lay in bed, unable to sleep. A gecko crawling across the ceiling startled him. What was that creature? Would it harm him? He soon realized that there was nothing to fear, as these tiny lizards were on the hunt for insects. He looked at Maria, who was sleeping soundly. It was as if they had known each other their entire lives. He kissed her forehead and watched television until he finally drifted off. This act would repeat itself nightly for the next 30 days and become the best month of John's life. And the worst. 2 days later, Maria and John boarded their Cebu Pacific flight to Dumaguete. John had read a great article on the city in Forbes magazine, and it seemed to be a great place to start his new life. As the plane landed, he noticed how much smaller and less congested it was compared to Manila. The more foreign faces he saw, the more at ease he felt. When the taxi passed the boulevard, John's expression lit up. It had a beautiful view from all angles and even a Starbucks. He made a mental note to return later to explore it fully. As the taxi rounded First Street in the Margarita subdivision, it came to a stop in front of a small but neat house with a well-manicured lawn. Maria let out a sigh of relief. The cleaners had done a superb job in getting the place ready. The look on John's face was one of satisfaction, and he couldn't hide it. Maria noticed it, and it put her at ease. The real test would come later, when Ray would show up with the paperwork. John paid for the taxi and stood looking at the house. It was a surreal moment. He was now the proud owner of a 2-bedroom home in the Philippines with a sexy young wife and a ready-made family. Everything happened so fast. It was too much to take in now. He would rest up and get his feet underneath him and let it all sink in. He knew nothing of the Philippines. He had noticed the stares from the people everywhere he went, and that it was so hot, the perspiration staining his clothes. He left Kentucky with freezing temperatures and was now enjoying a tropical paradise. He hadn't eaten much because he slept much of the time in the hotel. The jet lag finally won out. It was all new to him. He was like a little baby having to learn how to walk again. But as he looked over at Maria, he knew it was all worth it, and he would do whatever he had to adjust and assimilate. Ray went to see his sister in the city hall to retrieve the phony documents for the sale of the home. He was now desperate. Aside from a monstrous drug habit, he was also betting heavily on the online cockfighting that has taken the Philippines by storm. Once upon a time, the sport was in decline, but now is raking in billions of pesos each year online. Millions of dollars are bet daily, and with a minimum bet of less than $2, it's attracting a vast audience. Ray had lost over 1 million pesos and didn't know how he would break the bad news to Maria. He had also accumulated a large debt to the group streaming the matches online. He had no way to pay. Maria would have to implement the second part of the scheme. Ask John to buy a car and open a business. Little did Ray know, but John had already gone through all the $60,000 that he had in his 401k buying the house and settling debts back home. He would take care of Maria and her daughter on the $3,000 monthly pension he received from his retirement. He had decided to take his Social Security early, so that would add another $1,700 to his monthly total. John would be considered rich in the Philippines, and with the purchase of the house out of the way, the money would allow them to live comfortably. John was about to discover that it was all a lie and that he had been scammed out of his life savings by the one person he trusted the most, Maria. There was a knock at the front door. "Honey, will you see who's at the door? I'm expecting my uncle to bring us the paperwork for the house today," Maria said to John. John opened the door and looked at the man standing outside. "May I help you?" John said. "I'm Ray, the uncle of Maria, and I've brought you the paperwork for the sale of the house." "Oh, come right in," John said as he unlatched the lock on the screen door. As Ray stepped in, John could detect the smell of alcohol and noticed the bloodshot eyes of the uncle. He looked like a man who had just come from a hard night of drinking and partying. Ray had no idea how right he was about his assessment of Ray. Maria came into the room and they all sat down at the kitchen table. John noticed that his name was nowhere to be seen on the documents. Maria informed him that foreigners could not own land in the Philippines. John was shocked and taken back. Why hadn't she told him about that sooner? "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" asked John. "Yes," Maria said. "We have to pay an immediate tax of another 500,000 pesos to finalize the deed." John said he could pay the tax in installments as he had spent all his money and was now depending solely on the retirement income. All the air was sucked out of the room by his statement. Ray gave Maria a nasty look and asked to talk to her outside. John moved closer to the door to try to understand the conversation, but it was all in Bisaya, their native language. Ray told Maria that he had lost all the remaining money gambling on online cockfighting and had run up a substantial debt with the group streaming the matches. He needed money and he needed it fast. The blood drained from the face of Maria. She thought she would faint. "How could you have spent all of our money on that stupid cockfighting? We were set for the rest of our lives," she screamed at Ray. "I don't want anything else to do with you or your stupid scams. You've ruined everything. I should have listened to my parents." Maria stormed back into the house and slammed the door behind her. She couldn't hide the pain she was feeling. She knew she would have to tell John what happened and to let him know that his life might be in jeopardy. John saw the despair in Maria's face and tried to console her. She told him everything. The $40,000 he had sent to her for the house was gone, and the place was only a rental. She told him that Ray was not her uncle, but the father of Brianna, her daughter. Through tears, she told him of the entire scam, and she also asked for his forgiveness. John didn't know what to do. He trusted her. Was it true that his life savings were gone? He told Maria to accompany him to the police station so he could file a case against Ray. Maria said no because she was also a part of the scheme and would be prosecuted as well. She directed John to the local police station and hurried back to Cebuland. Her life was over and she knew it. John walked into the station and asked to speak to someone who could help him. "How can we help you?" said the officer behind the desk. "I'm the victim of a scam, and the woman that I came to marry here, along with her boyfriend, have cheated me out of $40,000. Is there anything you can do to help me get my money back, or at least bring the people to justice?" The police chief, who was in the adjoining room, had heard the conversation and walked in. He told John that Filipino women running off with a foreigner's money and leaving him with nothing was common. He took down the information but didn't promise John anything because more than likely the money was long gone. And now that he had filed a case against the scammers, his life was in jeopardy. He should leave the country as soon as possible. John left the police station more confused than when he walked in. Filipino women running off with a foreigner's money and leaving him with nothing was common. The words reverberated in his head. He was in a state of shock. Now he had to get out of the country as quickly as possible to avoid being killed. He couldn't believe the turn of events. It all happened so fast. The last 30 days was the best month of his life. Maria loved him and he was sure of it. He never detected any deception. He hurried back to the house and started packing. He looked out the window and saw a man with a racing helmet with a darkened shield approaching the door. He didn't notice the other man waiting on the motorcycle in front of the house. He paused to think of what to do next, and then all hell broke loose as the bullets started tearing through the house. He crouched behind the counter, paralyzed by fear. As the bullets whizzed by, he sank as low to the floor as his body could go. And then as quickly as it had all started, it stopped. He heard the motorcycle speed off and grabbed a small bag with his passport, credit cards, and IDs and ran out the house as fast as he could. He spotted a taxi up the street. Huffing and puffing, he jumped into the back seat and told the taxi to take him to the airport. The hit team informed Ray that they were unsuccessful. He cursed out loud and knew he was in big trouble. He decided to hide out in the province in his family's compound until things had calmed down. He would figure out a way to pay back the money owed to the group. He jumped on the motorcycle and headed toward the province. Suddenly, two men on a motorcycle pulled alongside of him. Pop, 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 and they rode off. Ray lay dead on the side of the road with the engine of his motorcycle still running. "Flight crew, prepare for takeoff." The words brought John out of his daze. As a huge plane rumbled down the runway toward liftoff, a sense of relief came over him. He got out of this in pretty good shape. He was still alive, and the offer to come back to work was still on the table. He knew it would be some time before he would be able to get over Maria. He laughed to himself as the plane began its ascent towards the clouds. That was the best $60,000 I've ever spent. Maria got the news about Ray. She couldn't say that she was sad. He did it to himself. Had he only listened to her, they could have split the $4,700 every month from John's retirement. But he got greedy. As she signed into Filipino love, a profile caught her attention. This is the end of part 1 of the setup. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for part 2.